Hey, welcome back to What's Wrong with This Picture. We have a special guest with us today, Alec Hosterman, Professor of Communications at Indiana University, and as well as the ever-present Mr. Dennis Guillaume. There we go. Everybody take a bow. We are we're talking about the photos that Alec was had an opportunity to shoot of the Joplin, Missouri tornado disaster recently on Memorial Day, and we had some additional shots to go through here. We were just kind of looking at just in general in terms of techniques and things that you used, and then we also want to talk a little bit about how you deal with the situations here. But we also have a couple of questions from the chat room that I think we can kind of get started with. One of them was, first of all, you arrived about a week after the disaster, so regardless of the devastation that we're seeing in these photos, there was still things were a great deal cleaned up to some degree. So your pathway through was relatively easy as opposed to right after the disaster.
Relatively,
obviously.
it was streets were passable. Cars were going back and forth,
right,
with the help of guards. The National Guard and the cops were patrolling the streets, but the down power lines, all the power was shut off.
Right.
And so that immediate need for safety was taken care of right afterwards.
So you were relatively safe.
I was
as
relatively
long as you didn't
safe.
get off the pathways.
Right, and I stayed on the streets and I stayed on the sidewalks, which were all starting to get cleaned up, which you still had to be careful of glass, you had to be careful of objects you had no idea about, but
right.
that was part of it.
Okay. Were you in a position, or did it make sense, was there any situation where you could have helped or might have been expected to assist, just because you happened to be there at a moment?
My gut wanted to drop my camera and to help whichever family I saw, but I also knew that if I did that, I would probably be a hindrance more than anything, simply because I was there for a short period of time.
Right.
So my human instinct wanted to kick in, but then the common sense kicked in and said, there are professional volunteers there, there are people helping out, I don't want to harm that event going on.
Right.
So I stuck with what I knew and my gifts and what I could contribute, and that was being a photographer.
Right. Okay. Well,
so it was a decision I made.
Yeah, you do have to make that choice. Are you going to stay for 3 days so that you can go through the learning curve and know what you're supposed to do, or are you going to be there for a half an hour and just be in the way?
And there's a blogger from Northwest Indiana who spent a week and a half down there after the tragedy. He's the professional volunteer. He did work on that. I knew I was there for an hour, hour and a half. I knew what I could do within that period of time.
Right. Okay, great. Yeah. So let's look at, we have another, just to kind of go through some of the shots here in sequence that we have. These are some of the volunteers that you were talking about, aren't they?
Absolutely. We have the professional volunteers coming through. These are the search and rescue dogs that they were using on each of the houses that still needed to be searched. And so they were all taking a break right here, and they're really friendly dogs, I will have to say that. But it was also kind of eye-opening knowing that they were search and rescue dogs, and what they were looking for were possibly dead bodies. The good news is all unaccounted people in Joplin, Missouri have been accounted for.
But at this point, as we're recording today,
yes. So that's the kind of a benefit. But a week after, they were still looking.
Okay. All right. Let's see our next. This is just this is really just a record shot of the devastation.
Yes. What you saw on television was not what it was like, and you can only go so far. So this image, I wanted to show how much of it was out there, and it wasn't just a couple houses here and there. This was an entire area and neighborhood that was wiped out.
Wanted to ask this question, and we were talking earlier about equipment that you had with you. Did you at this point, were you at 17 millimeters?
No.
You weren't wide open?
I wasn't completely wide open yet. Okay. And in fact, I took quite a few photographs where I did this. This was probably about at a 50 millimeter mark, roughly.
Okay, yeah, it doesn't look like you would have been all the way. Yep. If you had widened out, would you have gotten more of the same devastation?
Absolutely, and I did. In fact, this shot, and quite a few. That was one of the reasons I was doing, I took a couple cards with me. I was doing a lot of closers and then a lot of wide angles, just for my own purposes.
Because this strikes me as, this is very descriptive of absolute devastation. And, the thought that came to my mind was wider, same thing, and which makes it in some ways even more descriptive of the devastation because of the width that you could get.
More of a story was
yeah.
involved in that photograph when you go wider.
Yep.
Okay.
Here is something that I ran across really kind of interesting. The house on the left, the blue house,
Right.
not much damage. The house on the right, the roof is gone, the windows are gone, the doors are gone, part of the back is totally gone.
Oh my goodness.
And it was, a lot of places were like that. Not in the deep heart of the where the
Right.
tornado hit, but it was just, on the left we're okay, on the right,
Well, it's
gone.
a freaky thing about tornadoes, and you get right to the edge of where the forces are strong enough to blow down a house, and you may have literally inches between where
Yep.
it's strong enough and where it's not, and it's just the physics of it.
and this was an F5 tornado. I think that they logged it in at 200 mile an hour winds. And when you drive into that area afterwards, you saw it. It looked like a war zone.
Yeah.
It was a line that was crossed, and it literally
Yeah.
looked like a war zone.
Oh my goodness. So, okay, what's next on our list here? Oh, okay.
This was part of my training, getting into the idea of composing a field. I wanted the background as well as the foreground. Luckily, my camera was doing some wonderful metering, so I didn't have to worry about that. So I got down a little bit more. I think the doll provides a real telling photograph in terms of the story, and the eye leads itself to the other doll, and then in the background you see the roots of this huge tree just pulled up like it was nothing.
Now, you didn't arrange these items at all.
No, in fact, I made a conscious effort not to arrange anything. I didn't
Yeah.
move anything. The only arranging I did was me. And this was, I went down a little bit more, and so I spent a little bit more time composing this shot
Right.
the way it would tell the best story.
Yeah.
Now, one of the choices you may have stayed on program mode. One of the choices you might have had would have been to gone to aperture priority and make sure that you went to a smaller aperture so that you could increase the depth of field and be sure that you got the, as it turned out you did anyway,
Yep.
but you got the doll in focus, the second doll, which is about a third of to a half of the way up, which, you know, the old depth of field thing, it's in focus from a third up to and 2/3 after
Yep.
the point of focus. So did you consciously focus where on this in order to get this to happen? About where the second doll was?
About in between the first doll and the second doll.
Okay.
This one was actually, I took a couple of different shots. This one turned out the best out of the group.
Which would have been 1/3 in front of the focal point, 2/3 behind the focal
Exactly.
point. That gives you that range. Now, assuming that your camera chose a small enough aperture, that gives you the range to be able to be sure that I'm going to have that whole area pretty much in focus, acceptable focus.
And there was more detail in the foreground, and that was with the dolls and that kind of stuff. And I knew if I had to lose the background a little bit, that would be okay. But still, it turned out really well.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And like you've been saying, I wasn't trying for arty shots or anything, but you get some. Sometimes they present themselves.
They present
like that
themselves. The
Well,
globe.
the other thing,
Yeah.
the point I want to make too, is that as a photographer, a professional photographer, or a journalist who's going in to get these photographs to document what happened, one of your obligations is to use the skills that you possess in order to get that kind of shot that you know it's going to come out that way, as opposed to, gee, I was lucky I got that shot. Instead of being lucky, what you know is, if I do this and I do this, I'm going to have this happen.
Yep. Yeah.
And so unlike the snapshot photographer who's just walking around taking pictures, you have the ability, and therefore I would say the obligation, to use that knowledge and say, all right, what I want to do with this shot, use a smaller aperture, and I want to increase therefore the depth of field so I get the emotional content that I'm looking
was
for.
part of it.
Doll, and then
Tree.
disaster tree, or
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah.
We want to get. So we've got a number of other pictures to get in this segment. So let's look at the next one here.
Here,
Great
I
shot. I mean, not great devastation.
Composition-wise, I wanted him in the middle.
Yeah.
Somewhat in the middle, and I wanted so much detail all the way around him because that's what I saw.
Right.
And that's what actually that was majority of the time when I was taking these photographs was, how do I tell this story and how do people understand the story? And this, I thought, showed the extent to which the devastation occurred.
Right. And putting a person in it gives you that scale too.
Yes.
Right.
You're able to understand where he is, in comparison to all those houses way back in the background, all the trees that were topped off.
Right.
Well, and if you were going to put a caption on this picture, the question might be, what is he thinking as he stands there? You know,
Yeah.
what would the caption be that would describe his thought process?
My macabre sense of humor says, "Where's Waldo?" is the caption. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
not- yeah, that's right. Next picture. Let's see what we've got. This is really wonderful documentation because I love this because again here we've got the internet of the moment all over that house.
Yes, I ran across this on a variety of different places, and it took me a little bit to figure out what it was. First off, there are notations of 27th East, Virginia's North. All of the street signs were gone.
Right.
So volunteers were writing on the sides of houses, those that were still available, what streets they were at. So people knew location markers. Again, thank you, helpers. I saw a lot of those. You'll see right above there and about middle of the way, we are okay. You saw we are okay. Those homeowners wanted to let everybody else know that they made it, or they would see on sides of houses that said, these people are okay. So that was part of that community building, I thought.
Right.
What was really telling were all of the orange, hot orange Indiglo markings.
That you see in the middle, yeah.
Yeah, and if you see an X, that means the house had been searched.
Okay, so they don't come back and look
Don't
again.
come back. People, we've taken care of this. Move on to the next one. Because there were a variety of searchers, insurance agents, people looking to go through them, and
Cool.
it
All
really
right.
was.
All right, next shot.
Volunteers were popping up everywhere, and in fact, if you notice, they had a small grill. This was in the backyard of somebody's house, by the way.
Right, right.
They had a small grill on the other side, and they had taken this old bureau dresser, turned it right side, and then put all of the condiments, and they were cooking food for helpers. So they
Right.
were using part of the stuff, the devastation out there, to help other people.
That's incredible.
It
Yeah,
was.
good community.
This was the community building. This gentleman had survived, and he had his dog, and he had a smile on his face when he was talking to
Right,
people.
but he had probably because he had the dog.
Yes, that was his family.
Yep.
And I think that became really telling of what the community started to feel even
Right.
just a week after.
Right. We find ourselves. It's the story. You know, in the midst of the disaster, that's when people come together. You really find out who your friends are.
It was,
And you also find out you have more friends than you thought you had a lot of
Absolutely.
times. So go ahead.
This probably is my very favorite shot out of the entire deal because it represents the idea of hope. Here's this boy who was very young, and he would have been helping his family out, and he needed a break.
Yeah.
His family's house was devastated. So he came over to this little area climbing tool in a park.
Yes.
And was, he was being a boy for 5 minutes.
Right.
He wanted to just be a boy. He climbed to the top, and I saw him look out on the devastated city of Joplin. And that was the moment the boy said, wow.
Yeah, he realized what was going on.
Yeah, and I think even at that moment he grew up very quickly, realizing that this is more than his house and his block.
Bigger than home.
Yeah.
All right, and our last session or photo for this section.
Here were actually, this was very common to find half houses, people going through them,
Yeah.
trying to find anything that was recoverable. And so the platform of the house is fine. They took a couple of chairs and they're going through, the mother's sitting there.
Are they trying to have dinner in the old dining room like they used to? In a
You
way?
know,
It sort of gives you the feeling that that's
It
what
sort
they're
of
up to.
does give you a feeling, and I think it's the dining room chairs.
Pretend
and,
the walls are still there.
Yeah, I think there was still the idea that I didn't believe that this happened.
Right.
And I was getting that a lot, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
Just the, not glazed over looks, but still in shock.
Just hoping they might wake up and it was a dream.
Yes.
Okay. Well, we're going to be back with more photos of Joplin, Missouri, and we're going to talk a little bit about the ethics and some of the ethical considerations in photographing a disaster like this on What's Wrong with This Picture. So stay with us.
Have a question or a comment for Dennis Guillaume? Get in touch at picture@rvnn.tv, and don't forget to send us your RVing pictures for possible use on an upcoming episode. You can also leave a voicemail for Dennis at 877-578-RVNN, extension 704. Follow RV Newsnet on Facebook and Twitter, and you can receive text messages to alert you when we're streaming live by texting RVNN to 72727. That way, you can join us live in the chat room, ask questions, and become part of the RV Newsnet family. Remember, any photos or other material submitted to us become the property of RV Newsnet and cannot be returned. Today's show is brought to you by Angie's List, where you'll find thousands of unbiased reports and reviews about service companies in your area. Whether you're looking for a roofer, plumber, house cleaner, dentist, or even a doctor, Angie's List members share their experiences with each other so that you can choose the service company that's right for your job. Companies can't pay to be on Angie's List, and the reviews come from people just like you who have had experience with the companies mentioned. To find out more, go to rvnn.tv and click on the Angie's List ad.